of what one looks like or what one is like as a physical body, a mental representation that focuses on physical features, broadly construed. Okay, the guy who had this idea first was a psychoanalyst named Schilder, Paul Schilder, who wrote a wonderful book. Despite the fact that he was a psychoanalyst, he wrote a wonderful book in 1938 on the self-image, and he gave us a definition of the self-image that I think nobody's ever done any better of: the picture of our own body, which we form in our mind, the way in which the body appears to ourselves. Notice, not the way our body appears, the way our body appears to ourselves. That is what is the essence of the self-image as an image. It's very clear that we have perception-based representations of other people. Okay, that's very clear. Well, if I ask you to close your eyes and come up with an image of your father, your mother, your brother, your sister, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, or whatever, you can do that. You can generate that from memory. You have some idea about what they look like, and of course, it's that idea of what they look like that allows you to recognize them when you're looking for them in the grocery store or at the mall. We have auditory images of what people sound like that allows us to interact with them when they call us on the phone. They say, "Hi, it's me." Well, I know you can look at your screen and say, it says Killstrom, but back in the old days, you couldn't do that. You had to be able to recognize people's voices, and so we do. We know that we can make judgments about people, reliable, not necessarily valid, but reliable judgments about people based solely on visual information. So judgments about how old they are, what gender they are, whether they have characteristically masculine or feminine features. We can use visual information like baby facedness to make judgments about power. And in general, especially the face is a very powerful social stimulus. It's a point of contact for most social interaction, and it's from the face that we try to read information about people's emotional states and whether they're telling us the truth and stuff like that. So this is more or less kind of anecdotal evidence that we actually do have internal perception-based representations of other people. And the fact that we have internal perception-based representations of other people is a good reason for thinking that we have internal perception-based representations of ourselves as well. Again, this is an idea that goes way back in psychology. Sir Henry Head, an important British physiologist, argued that in order to navigate the world, we had to have some idea about where we were in space and where the positions of our various body parts are in space. So his idea of a body schema was that there was a postural body of the model which we carried around in our heads and updated as we moved around in the world. And we know from perceptual experiments on things like prism adaptation that we act on these internal representations and we can modify them with practice. Everybody know what prism adaptation is? Oh, this is great fun. Okay, you put on these goggles and they've got prisms. That's why it's called the prism adaptation experiment. And what they will do is, in radical cases they'll twist left and right, but in the more usual case they'll displace the whole world by like 45 degrees. Right? So you're looking out there, right, through these things, and the experimenter will say, there's this object, and I want you to grab the cup, and you see the cup over here, right? So you reach over there, but it's really over there because the prisms have displaced the world 45 degrees. You have some sense of where you are with respect to the world, but it's wrong. Okay. Well, what happens is, if you wear these goggles for a long enough period of time, you can adapt to this so that you now begin to reach in the right place. And then when they take the goggles off, you're all screwed up, right? Because you're reaching where you think this thing is, and it's not there, it's over there, right? And you have to readapt all over the place. These prism adaptation experiments are a really good demonstration of what Henry Head had in mind when he talked about a sense of where our bodies are in space. So we have this internal mental representation of our bodies, at least, but the self-image probably goes further than that. Do you have a quick question? Well, it's not just proprioception. It's capital P, proprioception, right? It's a very important thing. But yeah, it is like that. That's kind of the idea that you have, sense of balance, whether you're upright or whatever. Yeah, in sensation perception, we call it proprioception. Here, we call it the self-image, right? Okay, so let's have another demonstration. This is one of my favorite experiments. It's on my Faustian list of experiments I would have sold my soul to have done. It's a wonderful experiment by Mita and colleagues on the mirror exposure effect, in which they asked people to make judgments about photographs of themselves and other people that they know. And what they did was to, the stimuli are sometimes a true image of the person as it would be in a photograph. And then in other cases, they reversed the photograph left-right so that the person is looking at the photograph as the person him or herself would in a mirror. And what they asked people to do is to say, which photograph do you like best? Which photograph do you like better? So it was a choice of two. Here's an idea of this. This is Marilyn Monroe. And subjects would be asked which picture they prefer. This is a photograph of the movie star. This is the mirror reverse photograph of the movie star. And the idea here is people are just asked which they like. And people overwhelmingly pick the image on the left, okay, with her beauty mark on her left cheek, because that's the way we've seen Marilyn Monroe in countless movies and other kinds of images. This is just an example of the mirror exposure effect. But the idea is that if she had been alive for the experiment and we had asked Monroe to pick which image she herself liked, she would have picked this one, the mirror reverse image with the beauty mark on the other side, because that's the way she sees herself. Okay? And in fact, that's exactly what happens here. Here we have people looking at pictures of themselves and of their friends. In the second study, they had people looking at pictures of themselves or their boyfriends or girlfriends, a really good friend, okay? And it turns out that when people are looking at pictures of themselves, they strongly prefer the mirror reversed image. When people are looking at pictures of their friends, they strongly prefer the unreversed image. This is a demonstration not just of the mirror exposure effect, but more deeply, this is a demonstration that when we look at a picture, we match that picture up with an internal mental representation of the person being pictured, right? And if it matches, we like it. If it doesn't match, we don't like it. So again, the fact that we like the mirror image, the mirror reversed, the picture of ourselves, suggests that we have in our heads a image of what we look like that is derived from looking at ourselves in the mirror every morning when you brush your teeth or shave or whatever it is you do. Okay, so there's a nice demonstration. There is a nice clinical literature on distortions of body image. Don't get as much attention as they should, except for eating disorder. But we'll see distortions of body image in acute schizophrenia, in eating disorders. Bulimics and anorectics will often perceive themselves as fatter than they actually are. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. In body dysmorphic disorder, people are concerned about some perceived imperfection in their physical appearance, which nobody else can see. My nose is too long, my nose is too fat, something like that, but everybody else says it looks fine. Some amputees will experience phantom limbs. That is, they'll continue to experience their limb as if it is still attached to their body, whereas in fact it's not. Those of you who are following the Malaysian airliner crash noticed there's both CNN and public television have their aviation expert Miles O'Brien on. O'Brien recently lost his left arm in an accident while he was on the job, and he's written about this experience. I know it's not there, but I still feel it, right? It's a kind of phantom limb experience. And then there's this wonderful neurological syndrome called autotopagnosia, which is kind of like prosopagnosia, I suppose, where people can identify body parts. If the physician touches a body part and say, what's this? And they say, it's an arm or whatever. But if you say, would you show me which one is your left arm or your right arm, the patient can't do it. They can't identify their own body parts. So there are these clinical anomalies of body image, which again suggests that we actually do have an internal perception-based representation of what we look like. Anybody ever listen to yourself on a tape recorder? Sound like you? No. Okay, there you go. See, it doesn't sound like me. Well, how would you know if you didn't have some internal representation of what you sound like? And the reason it doesn't sound like you is that you've actually got two routes to hearing yourself. There's through the ears and there's bone conduction. So you actually hear your voice in a manner that's different from when you're speaking. You hear your voice differently than when you just listen to it. But anyway, there's another example of having this internal representation. And clinicians from time to time have developed different ways of studying the body image. Here's we won't do this. Here's a very good one. A series of studies on normal and eating disordered people having to do with desirable body shape. Here's a classic study by April Fallon and Paul Rosen, college undergraduates who were given what's known as a body image assessment. What the body image assessment consists of is a number of line drawings of people clad in swimsuits. Okay, so they're not naked people. And these people range from the very, very, very thin to the very, very, very not thin. And there's a line underneath them. And what subjects are supposed to do is to place a stroke across the line that represents where their current body is, where their ideal body would be, where they find the body most attractive, what body they find most attractive to the opposite sex. Here's an example. Okay. And this is normative data from just ordinary college students, people like yourselves, women judging women's figures and men judging men's figures. And what you can see here is that, interestingly, the average college woman thinks that her body is a little on the heavy side, the ideal quite a bit on the thin side, and she's attracted to things somewhere in between. Men, these ratings cluster much more closely together, though even the men think that they could be thinner in order to be attractive to other people. The really interesting thing is what happens when you give this kind of test to people who are eating disordered, which in this study were women, because there are more women are seen clinically for eating disorders than men. Well, okay, let's do this one first. It's a generational study where mothers and their daughters are making these ratings, and you can again see that mothers and daughters cluster pretty closely together here. Fathers and sons also cluster pretty closely together in terms of where they think they are, what their ideal is, and so on. Okay. So here we've got this is a study by Zellner, again, it's college undergraduates, and they're classified as eating disordered based on this questionnaire called the Eating Attitudes Test, and then they're given the body image assessment. And what we have up here, these are men, just ordinary, randomly selected college men. These are non-eating disordered college women, and these are eating disordered college women. And again, for the non-eating disordered college women and for the college men, their ratings all cluster pretty closely together. But for the eating disordered women, you can see they're spread out. Now, what's interesting about this is all self-rating, right? So this represents where they think they are. This is their ideal. Notice the distance there, much more than for non-eating disordered women. And what's interesting about this as well is that where the ideal is actually quite distant from where they think people would be attractive or attractive to the opposite sex. Very interesting finding. But the most important thing about this is you can use a technique like this to rate what a person thinks he or she looks like, and then of course, in principle at least, you can compare them to what they actually do look like. A study which has not been done as often as it might have been done. But we'll give you an example in a minute. So again, here's a very nice just graphical demonstration of this. You've got normals and bulimics this time rating their current body image and their ideal pretty close together. Everybody thinks they're a little overweight, right? But the bulimics, their current the body image is way far away from their ideal. Well, what's the interesting thing about bulimics? Bulimics are actually a normal body weight because they're bulimic, right? Because they're always throwing up. What's interesting here is that you've got this distortion of their actual body image, very nicely displayed here. So yeah, here's you plot the difference between ideal body shape and current body shape for bulimic and non-bulimic the subjects as a function of body weight. And what you can see is this really interesting spread where the bulimics think they're heavier than the non-bulimics do, and the bulimic ideal is a lot thinner than the non-bulimic ideal. Again, this is just an example of how you can do these kinds of studies of body image. There's another technique that's recently been introduced, and that is to actually have people look at themselves in a mirror or on a video screen, and you distort the image, and then you have them bring the image back to where they think it's right. Okay, and then you can measure the distance from where they stop to what they actually look like. Here's a made-up example from a funhouse mirror, right? He doesn't look like that, right? He actually looks like that. But the question is, when he expands this now so that it looks right to him, how different is it going to be from what he actually looks like? Last year, 2013, Dove, the beauty products company, did a really interesting kind of study in which women were brought in and asked to describe themselves to police sketch artists. Remember this campaign? This is a fascinating campaign. And so that the expert sketch artist drew a picture of the woman from her verbal description of herself, that is, her verbal description of her self-image, and then as she was described by other people. And what you get is this really interesting discrepancy here. This is, in this case, this woman's self-description, this is the same woman as she was described by other people. The difference between these two is the difference between self-image, okay, and what somebody actually looks like. Okay, so we've got two different ways of thinking about the self as one's mental representation of oneself. Viewed as a meaning-based conceptual representation, we can think of the self as our description of those features that are characteristic of ourselves and tend to set us apart from other people. Viewed as a perception-based representation, we can think about the self as our internal representation of what we look like, what we sound like, for that matter, what we feel and taste and smell like. That may be quite discrepant from objective reality, but is our perception-based representation of ourselves for all that. On Wednesday, we're going to look at a different view of the self. One is the self as a memory structure, and we're not just going to do nodes and associative links. We're going to talk about the more interesting problem of autobiographical memory and how one's autobiographical memories are really represented in the mind. We'll see you then. Thank you very much.